Story Corner, presented by Jennifer. Mercy Thompson. Moon Called. Chapter 1, Part 2. Mac didn't come in the next day. It was a Saturday, and he might not know I worked most every Saturday if there were cars to fix. Maybe he moved on. I hoped Adam or none of his wolves hadn't found him before I had a chance to break the news of his presence more gently. The rules that allowed werewolves to live undetected among humankind for centuries tended to have fatal consequences for those who broke them. I worked until noon, then called to tell the nice young couple that their car was not a lost cause. Replacing the engine in it would cost them more than the car was worth. Bad news calls were my least favorite job. When Tad, my old assistant, had been around, I made him do them. I hung up as depressed as the hapless owners of the shiny, decked-out, well-loved car now destined for a boneyard. I scrubbed up and got as much of the gunk out from under my nails as was going to come and started in on the never-ending paperwork that had also fallen to Tad. I was glad he had gotten the scholarship that allowed him to head to the Ivy League college of his choice, but I really missed him. After 10 minutes, I decided there was nothing that could be put off until Monday. Hopefully by then I'd have an urgent repair, and I'd be able to put off the paperwork until Tuesday. I changed into clean jeans and a t-shirt, grabbed my jacket, and headed to O'Leary's for lunch. After lunch, I did some desultory grocery shopping and brought a small turkey to share with Nita. My mother called on the cell as I was getting into the car and tried to guilt me into driving up to Portland for Thanksgiving or Christmas. I weaseled my way out of both invitations. I had enough of family gatherings in the 2 years I lived with her to last a lifetime. It was not that they are bad, just the opposite. Kurt, my stepfather, is a soft-spoken, no-nonsense sort of person. Just the man to balance my mother. I later found out that he hadn't known about me until I showed up on his doorstep when I was 16. Even so, he opened his house to me without question and treated me as if I were his own. My mother, Margie, is baskets and cheerfully flaky. It's not difficult at all to envision her getting involved with a rodeo rider, like my father, any more than it would be difficult to imagine her running off to join the circus. That she is president of her local PTA is far more surprising. I like my mother and stepfather. Even like all of my half-siblings, who had greeted my sudden appearance in their lives with enthusiasm. They all lived together in one of those close-knit families that television likes to pretend is normal. I'm very happy to know people like that exist. I just don't belong there. I visit twice a year so they don't invade my home, and I make certain it isn't a holiday. Most of my visits are very short. I love them, but I love them better at a distance. By the time I hang up, I felt guilty and blue. I drove home and put the turkey in the fridge to thaw, fed the cat, and fed the cat. When cleaning the fridge didn't help my mood, though, I'm not sure why I expected it to, I got back in the car and drove to Hanford Reach. I don't go out to the Reach often. There are closer places to run. Or if I feel like driving, the Blue Mountains aren't too far away. But sometimes my soul craves the arid, desolate space of the preserve, especially after I get through talking with my mother. I parked the car and walked for a while until I was reasonably certain there was no one around. Then I took off my clothes and put them in the small day bag and shifted. Werewolves can take as much as 15 minutes to shift shape, and shifting is painful for them, which is something to keep in mind. Werewolves aren't the most friendly animals anyways, but if they've just shifted, it's a good policy to leave them alone for a while. Walkers' shifting, at least my shifting because I don't know any other walkers, is quick and painless. One moment I'm a person, the next a coyote. Pure magic. I just step from one form into the next. I rubbed my nose against my foreleg to take away the last tingle of the change. It always takes a moment to adjust to moving on 4 feet instead of 2. I know because I looked it up. The coyotes have different eyesight than humans, but mine is pretty much the same in either form. My hearing picks up a little, and so does my sense of smell, though even in human form, I've got better senses than most. I picked up the backpack, now stuffed with my clothes, and left it under a bunch of scrub. Then I shed the infera of my human existence and run into the desert. By the time I had chased 3 rabbits and teased a couple in a boat and with a close-up glimpse of my lovely furred self on the shore of the river, I felt much better. I don't have to change with the moon, but if I go too long on 2 feet, I get restless and moody. Happily tired, in human shape, and newly clothed, I got into my car and said my usual prayer as I turned the key. This time the diesel engine caught and purred. I never know from day to day if the rabbit will run. I drive it because it's cheap, not because it's a good car. There's a lot of truth in the agenda that all cars named after animals are lemons. On Sunday, I went to church. My church is so small that it shares its pastor with 3 other churches. It's one of those non-denominational churches so busy not condemning anyone that is a little that it has a little power to attract a steady congregation. There are relatively few regulars, and we leave each other mostly alone. Being in a unique position to understand what the world would be like without God and His churches to keep the worst of the evils at bay, I am a faithful attendee. It is not because of the werewolves. Werewolves can be dangerous if you get in their way, but they leave you alone if you are careful. They are no more evil than grizzly bears or great white sharks. There are other things, though, things that hide in the dark that are much, much worse. And vampires are only the tip of the iceberg. They are very good at hiding their natures from the human population. But I'm not human. I know them when I meet them, and they know me too. So I go to church every week. That Sunday, our pastor was sick, and the man who replaced him chose to give a sermon based on the scriptures of Exodus 22. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. He extended the meaning of the meaning to encompass the fae, and from him rose a miasma of fear and rage I could sense from my seat. It was people like him who kept the rest of the preternatural community in hiding almost 2 decades after the lesser fae were forced into the public view. About 30 years ago, the Grey Lords, the powerful mages who rule the fae, began to be concerned about the advance of science, particularly forensic science. They foresaw that the time of hiding was coming to an end. They decided to do damage control and see to it that the humans' realization of the world's magic as gentle as possible. They awaited the proper opportunity. When Hurlin Kincaid, an elderly billionaire real estate mogul, was found dead near his roses with a pair of garden shears in his neck, suspicion fell on his gardener, Kieran McBride, a quiet, plain-spoken, pleasant-faced man who had worked for Kincaid, a prize-winning gardener himself, for a number of years. I saw bits of the trial, as most Americans did. A sensational murder of one of the country's wealthiest men, who happens to be married to a beloved young actress, ensues the highest ratings for the networks. For several weeks, the murder occupied the news channels. The world got to see Kieran Kincaid with tears flowing down her California tan cheeks as she described her reaction to finding her dead husband lying next to his favorite rosebush, which had been hacked to pieces. Her testimony was Oscar quality, but she was upstaged by what happened next. Kieran McBride was defended by an expensive team of lawyers who had, amid much publicity, agreed to work pro bono. They called Kieran McBride to stand and skillfully bait the prosecuting attorney into asking McBride to hold the garden shears in his hands. He tried, but after only an instant his hands began to smoke before dropping them. At his attorney's request, he showed the blistered palm to the jury. He couldn't have been the murderer, the lawyer told the judge, jury, and the rest of the world, because Kieran McBride was a fate, a garden spirit, and he couldn't hold cold iron, not even through thick leather gloves. In a dramatic moment, McBride dropped his glamour and the spell that kept him appearing human. He wasn't beautiful, just the opposite, but anyone who had seen a Shar-Pei puppy knows there is great charisma in a certain sort of ugliness. One of the reasons McBride had been chosen by the Grey Lords was because garden spirits are gentle folk and easy to look at. His sorrowful, overly large brown eyes made the cover of magazines for weeks, opposite less than flattering pictures of Kincaid's wife, who was later convicted of her husband's death. And so the lesser fae, weak and attractive, revealed themselves at the command of the Grey Lords. The great and terrible, the powerful and powerfully ugly stayed hidden, awaiting the reaction of the world to the more planeted among them. Here, said the Grey Lords spin doctors who had been McBride's lawyers, are a hidden people. The gentle brownie who taught kindergarten because she loved children. the young man, a Selkie, who risked his life to save a victim of a boating accident. At first, it looked as though the Grey Lord's strategy would pay off for all of us preternationals, Fae or not. There were New York and LA restaurants where the rich and famous could be waited on by wood sprites and Merediths. Hollywood moguls remade Peter Pan using a boy who could actually fly and a real pixie for Tinkerbell. The resulting film made box office records. But even at the beginning, there was trouble. A well-known televangelist seized upon the fear of the Fae to increase his grip over his flock and their bank accounts. Conservative legislators began making noise about a registration policy. The government agencies began quietly making lists of Fae they thought they could use, or who might be used against them, because throughout Europe and parts of Asia, the lesser Fae were forced out of hiding by the Grey Lords. When the Grey Lords told Z, my old boss, that he had to come out 5 or 6 years ago, Z sold the garage to me and retired for a few months first. He'd seen what happened to some of the Fae who tried to continue their lives as if nothing had happened. It was all right for a Fae to be an entertainer or a tourist attraction, but the brownie kindergarten teacher was quietly pensioned off. No one wanted a Fae for a teacher, a mechanic, or a neighbor. Fae who lived in the upscale suburbs had windows broken and rude graffiti painted on their homes. Those who lived in less law-abiding places were mugged and beaten. They couldn't defend themselves for fear of the Grey Lords. Whatever the humans did to them, the Grey Lords would do worse. The wave of violence prompted the creation of 4 large reservations for Fae. Z told me that that's where the Fae in the government who saw the reservations as damage control and used fair means and foul to convince the rest of Congress. If a Fae agreed to live on the reservation, he was given a small house and a monthly stipend. Their children, like Z's son's Tad, were given scholarships to good universities where they might become useful members of society, if they could find jobs. The reservation sparked a lot of controversy on both sides. Personally, I thought the Grey Lords and the government might have paid more attention to the innumerable problems of the Native American reservations, but Z was convinced the reservations were only a first step in the Grey Lord's plan. I knew just enough about them to admit he might be right, but I worried anyways. Whatever ills it created, the reservation system lessened the growing problems between human and Fae, at least in the U.S. People like the visiting pasture, though, were proof that prejudice and hate were alive and well. Someone behind me muttered that he hoped Pastor Julio recovered before next week, and a round of mumbled agreement cheered me a little. I've heard people who've seen angels or felt their presence. I don't know if it's God or one of his angels I sensed, but there was a welcoming presence in most churches. As the pastor continued with his fear-driven speech, I could feel the spirit's growing sadness. The pastor shook my hand as I left the building. I'm not Fae. Broad though that term is. My magic comes from North America, not Europe, and I have no glamour, no need of it, to allow me to blend in with the human population. Even so, this man would have hated me had he known what I was. I smiled at him and thanked him for the service and wished him well. Love thy enemy, it says in the scriptures. My foster mother always added, at the very least, you will be polite to them.